Hello, everyone. I'm Jeannie Linky Northrop, a managing editor, and I'd like to welcome you to today's live broadcast of Taming the Data Tsunami from Decentralized Clinical Trials and Real World Data, as sponsored by Oracle Life Sciences, a leader in cloud technology, pharmaceutical research, and consulting. Oracle is trusted globally by professionals in both large and emerging companies engaged in clinical research and pharmacovigilance throughout the therapeutic development lifecycle, including pre and post drug launch activities. With more than 20 years' experience, Oracle Life Sciences is committed to supporting clinical development as well as leveraging real world evidence to deliver innovation and accelerate advancement, empowering the life sciences industry to help improve patient outcomes. You can learn more at oracle.com life sciences. We have a few important announcements before we begin with today's live webinar. First and foremost, we have a fantastic group of individuals joining us today for this webcast, and so it's designed to be interactive. Therefore, we encourage you to ask questions to them throughout the event. You can submit questions by typing them in the Q&A box, which can be found at the bottom of your video player. You can, in fact, enlarge the slide window by clicking on the small icon in the bottom right corner of your media player. Please note, however, that all slides will advance automatically throughout the event. If you do experience any technical problems viewing or hearing this presentation, please click on the question mark help widget located in the top right of your presentation window. Now I'd like to introduce and welcome today's distinguished panel. We have Mariah Baltziger, a Vice President and Head of Peri and Post-Approval Studies and Real-World Evidence Specialized Solutions, joining us from PPD. We also have Dr. Florence Mullum, a VP of Science with ObvioHealth. Also joining us from ObvioHealth is Scott Dixon, Chief Commercial Officer. And last but not least, we have David Blackman, Executive Director of Digital Trial Strategy at Oracle. I'm so excited to jump into today's program as it's on one of my favorite discussions. And as we continue to see advances, the role of decentralized trials becomes more and more evident. So at this time, let's jump into today's discussion. I'm going to open the floor up to David. David, go ahead. Welcome.
Great, thank you. And good morning, good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for taking the time to meet with our panel today as we discuss the impacts of data collection and proliferation strategies from decentralized trials and real-world data. As you mentioned, my name is David Blackman. I have responsibility for digital trial strategy and implementation at Oracle Life Sciences, and I also have the pleasure of moderating our panel discussion today. You know, with the multitude and variability of data sources being introduced into clinical care as well as clinical research, our topic today centers around and explores the impacts, expectations, and somewhat the challenges that multi-source data collection can have in reducing or adding burden on clinical participation. We also intend to explore how consolidating and aggregating data can ultimately help streamline your study and provide insights into the whole clinical continuum through the lens of four perspectives or disciplines. The first being simplifying and managing multidimensional data collection, and secondly, how that ties into operational execution. Third, we look to cover the benefits, application, and value in data consolidation, and then end off with the ultimate cost of research and the impact of the time value of money. To help unpack this topic, I'm really pleased to be joined by three of my industry peers who experience and insights, not just in clinical research, but also their backgrounds and leadership in real-world evidence and real-world data bring very, very important perspectives on this topic. So Mariah, Flo, Scott, welcome. Thank you again for joining me on today's panel discussion. Maybe just for introduction, would you like to spend just a few moments introducing yourselves, give us a little bit of insight into your background and your respective roles at your organizations?
Sure, thanks, David. Hi, everybody. Nice to see everybody today. My name is Mariah Baltziger, as David outlined. My current role, I've been with the organization for over 20 years. Most of that has been in the clinical trials space. The last 5 years has been focused in real-world evidence. So my role there is looking at innovative approaches to solving today's problems. And much of that is with data and access to data.
Hi everyone, my name's Florence Molam. I'm the VP of Science at ObvioHealth. So I am responsible for ensuring that the scientific voice is embedded across the organisation. So ObvioHealth provides CRO services, and we also have a platform for data collection. So it's ensuring that when our clients come to us that we are thinking about their study design from the scientific perspective, and also when we're delivering studies that the platform and the services and the operational side of things that sit around that are meeting the scientific and regulatory needs of the study, and have the expertise in ECOA. So that tends to be my focus. I'm excited to be here.
And I'm Scott Dixon, the Chief Commercial Officer here at Obvio. I've been in the industry, like David and Mariah, for probably the majority of my career, for 25 plus years. Had the pleasure of, interacting with a lot of med device, pharma, CROs across the world, and looking at how do we improve the patient journey, and then how do we, do not impact the site perspective as well. So I think oftentimes we forget about the humans that are involved in the studies, and then how do we create less friction from participating in a study, and also the wealth of data that we're going to talk about later today. But again, appreciate everybody and look forward to the discussion.
Great, thanks everyone. So let me get it kicked off. At Oracle, we look to solutioning today's operational efficiencies and challenges to deliver tomorrow's powerful insights. I think that's a strong statement, but it's what we look to do. And our industry is debated, not just how to best capitalize on the magnitude and multi-source nature of new data that's being captured as part of digital clinical trials, but I think importantly, the systems that are capable of aggregating and integrating all of these types of data to provide these consolidated, actionable sources of truth. Clinical research and clinical care, I think, arguably are moving further towards a digital data model. And DCT, or decentralized clinical trials, for example, are foundational elements in this future digital data models that will ultimately, we believe, lead to automation of things like study setup, data collection, certainly clinical operations, data analytics, and automation for decision making. So I think one of the primary questions that we need to answer is more data always better, or is this really more of a bell curve?
Yeah, so I think as we approach this opportunity that we now have in the industry, where we've got data coming from all different types of sources and a real opportunity to understand more about participant experience in these clinical trials, we need to think really carefully about how much data and what we're going to do with all of that data. So I think it's not necessarily the case that more data is better. I think we need to really understand what we're going to do with that data. So perhaps not enough data, we're not going to be able to realize our endpoints, we're not going to be able to get a well-rounded understanding of the benefits and the risks of a treatment and the participant experience. But go the other end, and we've got data coming from all different types of sources, and how do we utilize that, and how do we use it all, and how do we bring it together? And I think we need to be really careful that we're not just getting all of this data and not knowing what to do with it or not using it, because the other side of that is a massive burden on all of the stakeholders within the clinical trial context. So I think there's a happy medium, and I think we really need to realize that and understand what that happy medium is, and it will just depend on the specific study at hand as well.
Great, thank you. Mariah, perhaps can you give us some insights on, in light of what we were talking about, all these data models which are going to lead to automation through setup, data collection, clinical operations, automation of decision making. Can you give us some insights on how to streamline the approach to DCT data collection and management in a scalable manner?
So, as I mentioned, I work in the real-world evidence space and have for about the last 5 years. And we really saw non-interventional studies as early use cases for many of these types of efforts. And so I think we've learned a lot from that. And observational studies aren't necessarily less complicated or less complex than interventional clinical trials. They're just different, right? So we've learned a lot from that. I think when we think about complexity as one of those pieces to consider, The more we can reduce the complexity of a clinical trial will certainly help streamline, to your point, David. Do we have to collect these particular data points? Are they informing the endpoint analyses? Are they necessary for safety? Do they have to be collected, 10 times throughout the study? Could they maybe be collected just a couple of times during the study and give you those same outcomes? So I think, that's just one small piece to it. As you both have alluded to, more isn't necessarily better, and we'll probably see that as a theme throughout this conversation. I think the other piece is looking at platform capabilities. So, as we want to streamline collection and streamline just the data itself, can there be opportunities to make it easier for patients, for sites, from a platform perspective as well? And I think we've, that's something that the industry is looking at as a whole.
Great, thank you, Mariah. Scott, do you want to add anything to Mariah and Flo's comments?
Well, yeah, and I think you probably all three covered it pretty well, but I think, I always start to find the end goal, right? That's your starting point, is what do you want to do and what is the goal of the program or study or set of studies? And then work backwards to try to alleviate, and I said this at the beginning, is how do we reduce friction? People often forget about the patient journey and the site journey. We, have a lot of technology that we tend to try to throw at different role types and users, but I think we just need to focus on how do we make it easier, reduce the visits if it's appropriate, and only to collect the data and use the tech as it's needed. Because sometimes more complicates it and people get frustrated, and site burden is coming into play, and also the participant and the caregiver burden comes into play as well. But again, just think about how do we do it better.
Yeah, and that's great. There was a common theme that all of you brought up, and I think as an industry, we very much focused on how do we empower the patient and simplify their experience in clinical participation. But the common theme that I've heard and that we believe outside is that we need to focus on not just the site, but the overall administration of the study to truly start to drive some time and cost value as well. With the continued adoption of digital and decentralized methods, and we certainly have seen growth in this space, we are today collecting more and presumably better data on a patient's health status, but that data is coming from a broader, varying range of sources. Yes, it's coming from the sites, but it's coming from labs, imaging, wearable sensors, devices, companion apps, real-world data, and even to some extent, health records. And the common agreed to perspective is that early access to data and the potential to collect thousands of data points from various devices and systems has a lot of benefit and may change, for example, how a patient's condition is monitored, how adverse events are detected, or even identify outcome trends that can support earlier go or no-go decision-making. But with all the expectations of hybrid and digital decentralized study designs might bring, new pain points have certainly emerged around the collection, amalgamation, interrogation of these additional data sources. Maybe Flo and Scott, as a provider in this space, how do we ensure that sponsor sites and study teams can efficiently and easily manage this wealth of data to deliver actionable insights, ultimately unlocking the promise of value that digital direct from patient will bring?
Yeah, so I think, we've got all of this opportunity to collect these different types of data. We've got, wearables, we've got labs, like you said, we've got data coming from all of these different areas. And I think there's one element, which is looking at the endpoints. So at the end of your study, have you met the endpoints? Have you shown that it's a safe treatment, it's efficacious? But this data is also coming in throughout the study, and there's potential decision points that can occur throughout the study, or we can pick up on certain issues that the participant is having quicker. But we need to think about who's reviewing that data and who's looking at that data. And it's a new type of data as well. So wearables, you've got all of this data incoming, you've got millions of data points, if not more. And we need to think about how sites utilize that. And I think training is incredibly important. We need to think about this new type of data that they're being exposed to and how they understand it and how they action it. And, their capacity, they're really busy, and we need to ensure that we're working with them together to make this as beneficial as possible for the sites and the participants. And I'm sure Scott's got some perspective on what he's seeing from our clients and what they want and things like that.
Yeah, and I think, and again, I've been doing this for a very long time. DCT has been out there for years and years, right? We just call it a different acronym at this point. But ECOA and direct-to-patient technologies, televisits, I think kind of came into the forefront, to Mariah's point, around observational studies. And then the last 3 or 4 years, it kind of came into the forefront. And I think sometimes we reverberate back into old ways. But I think if we can take a look, and again, if we start at the end goal, what it is, how do we make that onboarding easier at the site level with all of these different technologies that could be used? Because it does create problems, and I'm going to call it friction again at the site level. And then even at the participant level is, how do we make it easier to onboard, whether they're in clinic or actually remote, with all these various wearables and tech and apps, and maybe it's a companion app, or maybe it's a digital therapeutic that's applied with your therapy or injection that's happening. But again, I think if we just take a look, and again, we're all humans, right? So what would it make our life easier as we're trying to participate? Do I have to go into the clinic just for a blood draw, or can I do that more locally? And what does that data stream look like? Could I be doing wearables, and could I do a televisit with blood pressure and all the different, biometric surveys that can be done remote? So again, just think about it cognitively, as we're starting to do the protocol planning. And what we're seeing is, let's try to make it easier, right? And only collect what you need, because at the end of the day, what we see is a lot of the end clients are the prescribing physicians and their staff, plus the patient, and how do we ease that burden?
I think we also need to think about the participant expectation as well, of all of that data that's being collected. So whether it's they're entering patient-reported outcome measures, or whether they've got a wearable on, but what are they expecting is happening with that data throughout the trial? Do they think that they should have access to it? Do they think that the site is going to be intervening at different points? So I think it's managing expectations for the participants as well.
Yeah, thank you, Mariah. I think access to more and different data, when used properly, has a huge benefit, and I think we've sort of touched on that in our recent commentary. But are there, from a CRO who conducts these studies, are there additional process elements that should be put in place to review and respond to this data influx? We talk about technology, we talk about people, we talk about process. I think, for example, of convergence of clinical and healthcare data, like real world data. Where's the true value for CRO in this, and if and where do we need to re-examine and adjust our processes to capitalize on the value?
Yeah, so it's probably worth defining real-world data for folks that aren't familiar. I think it's probably at the forefront of everybody's awareness these days. But so real-world data is really data that's captured from people in the wild. So it could be, it could be your watch as you're doing your workout in the morning, or just going on your afternoon walk. It could be claims data from visits to your physician or your physical therapist. It could be EMR data that comes from your visit to your cardiologist or your primary care physician. So real world data comes in all kinds of forms. And I think, there's so much potential for what that's used for. And to your point, David, how we might adjust process to include that sort of data varies by what purpose it serves. So when we think about using the data to optimize activities in a clinical trial, for example, when we think about feasibility of a protocol, are people with this particular indication seen every 6 months as part of standard of care? And if we go to every week for a clinical trial, how much different is that than their usual experience? And what kind of impact might that have on their willingness to participate? From a site selection perspective, using real world data to look at where most of your patients might be to recruit for a trial. And not only that, but looking at it through a diversity lens. So sites you may not have previously considered because they're not your go-to sites for a clinical trial in a particular indication. Are there opportunities in more rural locations or other sorts of community care type facilities that might have these subsets of patients that you're looking for, but you haven't really leveraged that type of site before because maybe they don't do clinical research. But then, there's other ways that we can use real world data. But from that perspective, when we think about adjusting the process, it's really about what can we use that already exists? What do we not have to recreate or create and use to inform the activities that we're doing, and not only inform, but ideally optimize?
Yeah, great, thank you. Let me stay with you for a minute, Mariah. I think a lot of the hope and hype around direct from patient research is really predicated on data collection around accuracy and speed, accurate, fast data collection directly from the patient outside of the traditional setting. And that brings with it the question, what does accuracy and timeliness actually mean for different data types? So how do you, for example, reconcile similar data collected across different collection methods? And you think of maybe like blood pressure that's collected from a wearable versus blood pressure that's collected in the office. And how does that lead to monitoring or identifying safety trends, given this potentially much larger amount of real-time data that we are going to have access to?
I think so. There's multiple pieces to your question. So I think we're all looking for the single source of the truth, right? So if you've got multiple places where data is being collected, that's never the ideal. So the ideal would be to upfront define which data is going to serve as your single source of the truth. So in your example, David, when you talk about collecting or blood pressure being collected on a watch versus being collected in the office, you would want to upfront acknowledge that there would be that for reconciliation needed, and upfront, much like we do a statistical analysis plan long before we actually have the data, you want to upfront define which data are you going to use as your single source of the truth, because the last thing you want to do anything by making decisions after the fact. So figuring out where those overlaps might be and defining early on which set of data you're going to use for your analysis. I think, when we think about monitoring and identifying safety signals, there's with so much data, we need to be much more sophisticated. Line listings and, looking at your computer and trying to identify those, like we used to do, I used to do on paper when I was a CRA many, many years ago. Even just using Excel or something like that is antiquated. So, we really need to look at much more sophisticated processes, employing things like AI, NLP, where it makes sense if the data isn't already curated and ready for that sort of thing. So I think there's quite a few opportunities, and certainly it's what we see, right? It's what we see the industry going towards.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. That, as we brought up right in the beginning, all of this success of all of this data collection is predicated on being able to derive insights out of that. And the best way to be able to do that is using automation and AI to derive some of those insights. I think, Scott, the second part of this question and Mariah's comments really tie well into that. As an organization like ObvioHealth that designs these studies, what does real-time direct from patient data really mean to our sites and sponsors and our study administration? And I think there's a current state and there's potentially a future state that we were sort of just alluding to around automation. Maybe you can give us a little bit of insight how you think about this from a site and sponsor perspective, and as well as study administration. Yeah,
and I think we've probably touched on some of this previously, but as the data is coming in from the patient's remote, right? Whether that's, through eCOA and devices and apps and wearables and, all of the different connected devices that are out there, a lot of times the sites get overwhelmed and we forget that, right? So how do we make it more prescriptive in the design of the study? And then what does or should a site be doing, right? So again, we want to make sure that the patients or participants are protected from a safety standpoint. So are signals being delivered that could, create a further interaction from the site level? And I've seen it, firsthand, and I think still it's true today. Every study has about 7 to 11 different types of technologies. So if we can trim some of those down and all the access point that a site needs to log on to or needs to react to, make it easier. So have that single source of truth that Mariah was talking about earlier, is how do we flow it up? And then all of these alerts and all of the signals that are there, use the technology that is now being deployed in the industry around AI and NLP to surface up what should a study coordinator or PI react to, or a CRA or data manager even. So I think that's what we're seeing more of. All this data is there. Now, what do we do with it? And how do we make sure it's usable at the end of the day to get the journey from the site perspective and actually the participant to be more productive, to keep them engaged, keep them enrolled, and actually get to the endpoint of the study overall.
Oh, I think you're on mute, David.
I'm sorry, there we go again. So Flo, let me just kick it over to you. I think Scott was starting to go down this pathway. But as a provider of technology and services related to direct from patient data collection and trying to unlock studies to take advantage of direct or remote patient research, where's the untapped opportunity here? We look to optimizing or streamline how studies are conducted. I think a lot of that is predicated on design from the beginning. But what are we not doing today or taking advantage of today that we should do? Where's that untapped opportunity?
I think collaboration. I think in terms of, we've got all these different stakeholders within clinical trials. So at Obvio, we've got the CRO service side of things, we've got the technology, but we're also working with our sponsors, and then we've also got the participants, and we've got the sites. And I think it's very much about collaboration between all of those stakeholders. And I think we need to do more of that. And I think that is how we're going to really realise the opportunity that is presented, because we can have all these different data streams and we've got all of these different systems, but how do we actually utilise them in the most efficient way that actually reduces burden? And I think it centres around reducing burden. So we want to really get the best data that we can. We want to ensure that the participants and sites are providing that, and that it's done in a way that's least burdensome for everyone. And I think upfront planning from the very beginning, and I think Mariah was just referring to this, whatever data it is that you want to collect, or if you're looking at a way of collecting data remotely where it was traditionally done at site, just really planning for that upfront, ensuring that the way you're going to measure it is within the acceptable realms of accuracy. When you've got data coming in more real time, what is the acceptable time frame in terms of actioning any data? Is it just going to be for your endpoints at the end of the trial, or is it going to be used throughout the trial? And managing the expectations of everyone around that, and also understanding whether they have the capacity to do that. Sites have got lots on, participants have got lots on, so it's just ensuring that we streamline it all and it's done in a way that's acceptable for everyone.
Great, thank you. Mariah, Flo was sort of talking around collaboration, and I think there's process collaboration, there's collaboration between participants, but there's also collaboration across providers in the industry. And as a customer and a CRO, how do you decide which technology provider to use, for which solutions, and what are some of the critical decision points for your selection or recommendations?
Today I'm actually at a conference right now, and the conference hall is filled with different organizations providing different services with different levels of tech, right? So I think everybody's probably seen the myriad of providers that do something but it's just a little bit different than the other company that does the exact, or what would appear to be the exact same thing. So, you know, and I think, Scott, you alluded to this earlier as well. You know, do you let what the solution you need is drive the tech? Or in some cases, it may be that there's some sort of tech out there that you didn't realize actually solved something that you didn't know was such an issue. And so I think it's a little bit of both, but you have to really know the space, and you have to have people who are experts in evaluation of what the right fit is for you. I think that's a challenge, maybe in all industries, but certainly in our industry now, where not everybody has grown up with, they may have grown up with tech, but they haven't grown up engaged in tech and embracing tech. And so those right people that can help you evaluate are super important. But really it's about differentiation and helping me understand what is it that is different about what you are doing. So maybe, you know, you've got this platform that does these activities. It sounds very similar to this other platform that does the same activities, but there's just a slight difference. And because you can articulate that difference to me, and that difference is actually really important to me, especially when it comes to data, there's so much nuance to it. That's really what's gonna, you know, beyond the use case itself, once you dig really deep, it's really about those little pieces. Am I gonna have to customize your platform to do what I need, or can your platform already do what I need it to do? And sometimes you can't answer that question by looking at a protocol or, you know, talking through what you think you need, because it becomes very nuanced.
Yeah, thank you, Mariah. I think you brought up a lot of really good points there. And in some ways, because of the diversity of data that needs to be collected across the different therapeutic areas, it's very difficult for any single provider to provide that differentiation across all different aspects of the clinical continuum. Scott, I'm going to put you on the spot on this one just a little bit. We spoke about collaboration. How do you see collaborative approaches that Obvio, you know, utilizes to provide some of that value and differentiation that Mariah was referring to?
Yeah, and I think first off, it's a great question, and Mariah's dead on. And right now, I've not run across a single platform that can do everything. So I think we still need to try to find best in class at what you do and try to find kind of the right fit for purpose. But as we're looking at it, and Flo can jump in here too, when we're looking at the protocols, it's sometimes very difficult to understand what does the sponsor really want to try to prove at the end of the day, and what is the goal that you're trying to get to. And there may be different areas that we've seen work really well. And I am a technology vendor and a solution provider, but sometimes tech can actually make it worse. So really think about the journey, think about what the end goal is, and then use the technology in the right spot, because technology doesn't solve all the ills, and it can actually make it worse if it's deployed wrong, or the journey, they hit a speed bump, or too many alerts are happening, or it's inconvenient to collect the type of data that you're trying to do, either in clinic or away from the clinic. But I think, again, just look at it more holistically. And we have been able to, work with sponsors from a collaboration standpoint and actually change the protocols, because they didn't think through all the steps to get to their end goal. And Flo, I don't know if you want to jump in from a patient side.
Yeah. So I think you've got that patient and site journey in terms of like your actual study design and how they're making their way through the study and what data you're collecting. But you've got the other side of it, the internal side that's not seen as much. So what platforms are you using? And like Mariah was saying, it's not, very rare that one provider has all of the solutions. So that's where that collaborative element comes in and that partnership. So for example, at Obvio, we're providing the participant data collection, but then we've got this partnership that we've decided to build with Oracle because we see that they really complement the Obvio platform and what we have to offer. And so we can create that more streamlined approach to the data collection on the back end of things. And Scott can probably talk more to that partnership element and the value that brings from the commercial perspective.
Yeah. Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, great setup. And again, it's a great partnership to do it because we don't want to have to go build everything that Oracle has. And it would be silly because those are all independent, very widely used products. So again, what my comment earlier is find the fit for purpose and find the right partners and make sure that single source of truth and try to limit a number of systems that any user has to access, whether it's the participant or even at the site level, or even data managers and sponsor level. Again, we think about the burden that the sponsor needs to look at all of their data as well. Just really think holistically as you're embarking on the protocol journey, and don't try to say, hey, here's a protocol, lob it to a vendor and expect it to be done cleanly. I think it's more collaboration on that front end leads to a better end product.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree with you more. Obviously, we're going down this journey together. But let me kind of switch gears on that a little bit and sort of go to clinical and scientific, sort of around monitoring and interventions. I think we've discussed a lot that the using direct from patient data or real-world data brings with a lot of additional data collection potential, insight potential. And this in return enables additional or continuous monitoring, which sites potentially might enable them to do earlier interventions at a site. Flo, could this actually mean that we end up not understanding the true safety profile of a new product as a site, or clinical staff can actually end up intervening before an event happens with all this real-time new data coming in? And what, for example, if this is a primary endpoint, could we actually increase placebo response, or as more attentive sites can intervene earlier than other sites?
Yeah, so I think, the aspects that we're now seeing of remote data collection, and though we've been collecting data outside of the clinic environment for many years now, we've really seen a push in recent years for decentralizing more elements where it can reduce that burden. And again, as we've been talking about today, collecting more data from different sources. The scientist in me then has that other perspective of, well, we're selling this as, that opportunity for greater monitoring, increase in participant safety. We can pick up on signals earlier. But the other side of that is the traditional view of clinical trials, that they're very controlled scientific experiments. And we have the aspect of placebo response mitigation and wanting to reduce the likelihood that the fact of a site interacting in a certain way with a participant or seeing certain data that might indicate they were in a certain arm could then influence how they interact with that participant and increase that placebo response. Or the fact that perhaps you've got a certain trial where you've got these safety endpoints, and if you intervene earlier to stop certain events happening, you're not going to get a true understanding of what the side effect profile was, for example, of that treatment. So we really have to balance all of this and to get to the optimal state, really, of ensuring that we're controlling as much as we can, so we know that any impact that we're seeing is truly due to the intervention that's being provided, but that we're also protecting participants and that safety is at the heart of everything we do. And it's a fine balance, and I think it's about us all working together to strike that balance.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really important perspective, Flo. Mariah and Scott, with that in mind, we need to mitigate some of that risk. Can you give some perspective, Mariah, on how careful planning or a focus on safety in terms of protocol development is needed to ensure that we don't introduce influence or bias? Essentially, how do we mitigate some of the potential risks that Flo highlighted a few moments ago?
Yeah, I'll start this, Scott, and maybe you can pick up. I think Flo's point is valid, right? When you think about a highly controlled clinical trial as an experiment, you want to control as much as possible. But the other risk to that is it becomes less like the real world. And, you bridging between clinical trials and the real world, it becomes further apart the more control you have and the less diverse the populations are, et cetera. So, you know, I think that upfront planning, like you mentioned, David, around, you know, what those data points are, how much do you have to collect? What is the safety profile of this drug already? Does it have a really good safety profile already? In which case, maybe you can minimize some of those things that might introduce bias. You know, there's probably other areas, and I don't know, Scott, what you have to add to that.
Yeah, and they're all valid points. And I think what we often see is, again, when a patient has an app in their hand and they can literally report in real time of changes in medication and changes in health or other things going on, and potentially chat real time with a coordinator or a PI or, you know, kind of a nursing team in the background, I think is what do you do in that case? If a patient remotely reports that they've had a change in health, they don't really know it's an AE, but how do you then surface that up? Is it really appropriate to collect that type of data first off, you know, based on the safety profile? Sponsors do get concerned, and this has to be addressed in the DMP and basically what are you going to do with the data and what should you be collecting and what should you not be collecting? Because too much can actually create a higher bias potentially. Are you soliciting a patient to report things that you wouldn't normally tell a doctor when you're in a live brick and mortar visit? So all of these things are coming into play, and I think we're learning a lot. I don't think there is one single answer to every protocol that's out there, but just be very cognizant as you're going through your protocol planning and design is what, again, do you want to get at the end of the day to get your endpoints and also actually protect the safety of the participants.
Great, thank you. Yeah, great response. We've discussed and commented, I think, a lot on the expected benefit of rapid access to patient data and automation through this future digital data models, you know, from real-world data, wearable devices, other digital reporting tools. Mariah, just to bring it down to practicality, can you give some insights and practical examples on how you guys are actually reviewing new types of data and how that's utilized for faster strategic decisions? You know, I think at the end of the day, we need to be driving value out of adding all these additional data points in. And Scott, can you maybe try and bridge that to the cost value of the investments that are being made in capturing all these new different data sources?
I'm sorry, I got froze there for a second, David.
Yeah, I think, Mariah, you may have frozen as well. Are you still with us? Yeah.
Faster insights. Can you hear me?
Yeah, Mariah, you just come back in. Could you start again? Thank you.
Yes. So, you know.
Yes, Scott, do you want to take over? I think we're losing Mariah here, but.
Yeah, I think from my standpoint, I think with kind of the strong need for speed and the trial setup and how do we get access to more data, I think is how do we take a look at, again, from start to finish, what is it really trying to get from the participant and actually interacting with the sites? And as more and more of that data comes in, is how are you taking a look at it? Just because you've collected it, make sure you're actually going to be able to analyze it and actually make decisions on it. So be more proactive on it versus reactive to it.
Flo, let me kick over to you a minute. If we think about tying data insights to data-driven decisions, you know, whether that's clinical and operational, you know, where in your view is the best opportunity for automation that's going to reduce that site and administrative burden that was a theme that came throughout our discussions today?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I think notifications and alerting, I think, is really important. So we don't want to be flagging all of the data, for example, that's incoming from a participant to a site. So we can set up the parameters at the beginning of a trial when we're building the platform, we're building the design. So we can think, well, actually, if these things happen, and the participant reports these things, then we have a notification that goes to the site to follow up. So we can set those parameters up from the very beginning. And I think that kind of goes back to what Mariah was saying earlier about what is the known safety profile of a new treatment, or, so we can start building in those things early on and those alerts early on. I think that's one benefit that we can get from automation. That's just off the top of my head.
Yeah, that was a put you on the spot question. I get it. Mariah, are you still with us, Mariah? I see that your video's come back alive again. Did you have something you wanted to add?
Yes, thank you. It takes a while for the data to get across the lines all the way from Copenhagen. So appreciate everybody's patience. So, faster, like Scott said, faster is the name of the game. And really it's to get to the, treatments into patients' hands faster. So I think there are several things. You can use operational data to give you indicators around if there's issues with the protocol, if there's issues with compliance or adherence to treatment, to study visits, to assessments. You can look at the quality of a site. From a clinical data perspective, you can look at the completeness of your data. You can evaluate that and what that means. You can have faster insights, will allow you to look at dose escalations earlier. If you've got stopping rules, you may be able to get to addressing those pieces earlier. Just overall earlier signals so that you can maximize the safety to the patients and certainly minimize that risk, as well as the potential to move forward.
Yeah, I think that's such a critical point around risk mitigation. Before we jump into, I see we have quite a few questions that have come in from our audience. Maybe just to sort of close off from each of you, if I were to ask you, what's your vision for the future of clinical research, right? In the future, we used to say, in 10 years, but perhaps 3 years. Let's stretch it even to 5. But what's your vision for the future of clinical research in 3 years? And if you were to have one lasting thought that you wanted our attendees to take away from that session, what would that be? Mariah, it would be okay. I'll start with you.
Sure. I think we've touched on it. More is not always better, but we certainly can't bury our heads in the sand. So we have to find a better way, right? Every day we have to find a better way to manage data, to manage knowledge. And I think this is the future. There's not going to be less data. There's going to be more. So we have to figure out how to manage that.
Excellent. Thank you. Flo.
Yeah, I think following on from that, I think the importance of collaboration and partnerships and not working in silos. If we've got all of this data coming from different streams, then we need to all work together to ensure that we can streamline it and we have it in a way that's actionable. And that's going to involve all these different parties who are working with that data, the key stakeholders, the key providers. And I think, it's about ensuring that we are transparent, that we break down those silos and we work collaboratively for the same goal.
Thanks. Scott?
Yeah, I think probably to tag on to both of the previous responses is a partnership, right? And people use that term rather loosely sometimes because they treat sometimes the technologies as vendors and not true partners. But again, I said this early on, is there's a lot of different technology that's being deployed, a lot of different solutions, and a lot of different sites and patients, participants, and other people that are involved in a study. Get their voice heard, right? And don't just lob protocols or RFPs and things like that, because I think at the end of the day, you're going to get to the same endpoint that you've done for the last 10 years or 5 years. Think about it, try to do it differently, and bring in your closely aligned partners to think more strategically way in advance, because trying to finalize a protocol and give it to a vendor, it's too late, right? Look more on the front end of that. And how do you get to the better end goal?
Excellent. That's really great. Thank you so much. Jean, can I switch over to you just for a few moments? I know we have some questions that are coming in.
Yes, we definitely have some questions coming in, so I'm really excited to kick off the Q&A session. But first, I just had to say some really great points, pros and cons, right? And I love the final question, just asking where we see things going in the future, because that's always the topic. That's always the last question, right? When we have any panel discussion, all right, where are we going next? So a lot of great insights and just very well-rounded. This has been a really great panel discussion. I want to thank you all for your time and attendance. As we do kick off the Q&A session, I want to remind our audience that we only have so much time for questions. Therefore, if we do not respond to your question live today, I promise our lovely panel of experts will be reviewing and responding offline. So please do not be discouraged to ask any questions you have. Even if you have a question based on their responses to a question that comes in from a different audience member, you can simply submit your question by typing it in the Q&A box, again, down below your video player. So that said, as we go to kick things off, Flo, this might be something you can speak upon, but I love this idea, the concept of better is more better. So is it better to collect more data less frequently, or in the contrary, less data more frequently?
So might not be a popular answer, but I think it depends. So it's going to very much depend on your study. It's going to depend on your therapeutic indication. It's going to depend on the intervention that you've got and the expected trajectory that will have throughout the trial, in the sense of, so I think a really good example is a recent guidance that has come out from the FDA on capturing PRO endpoints in oncology trials, and the fact that that data collection frequency and cadence can very much change throughout your trial as well. So depending on the expected safety profile of your treatment, it might be that it's more appropriate to collect data more frequently and more regularly during the first few months, because that's when you're likely to see the greatest level of toxicity. So actually, let's collect data more frequently, let's collect more of it outside the clinic environment to really understand the safety profile, the toxicity of that treatment. Whereas there's other data points that we could collect less frequently, so because we're maybe not expecting to see as much of a change throughout the trial. So perhaps quality of life, you're not going to measure it as frequently because it will take a bit longer to see the impact of that treatment. And then, if we go back to the collecting more frequently at the beginning, it may be that as the participant becomes more stable, they're more used to the treatment, that we don't need to be collecting data on safety and toxicity as frequently towards that point in the trial. So I think it's really about the therapeutic area, the actual design of your study, how long is your study, what is the treatment that you've got, and what do you expect from it. So yeah, not a straight answer.
No, honestly, what I was thinking most, just even my experience on the healthcare side, is we talk about precision oncology. And you brought up some great points. So I know a little out of the data world, but it does speak to everything being more personalized or everything being more individualized. So I thought you brought up some really great points. Thank you, Flo. Scott. Oh, go ahead, Flo. I'm sorry.
Well, I was just going to add on to the end of that, is I think the fact that collecting more data, or not necessarily more data, but data more frequently, I think also is very much advocating for digital data capture, because the likelihood is that you're not going to have a participant going into site every single week. So therefore, we can move some of that data collection to the remote environment, which means we're reducing that burden on the participant having to travel, having to attend site visits, but we can still collect that data from them in their everyday life.
Yeah, and I think that technology is amazing, and it's I think that's something for future considerations as well, right? So, Scott, before we run out of time, I have a question that I'd like to raise to your attention that I think is good to bring in. It's a little long-winded, so bear with me here. We've talked about, and we know how complex decentralized clinical trials are, right? For trial planners who have to contend with different levels of issues, such as digital maturity between the sites, regional regulations, different approaches on digitalization, different levels of patient, family, levels of comfort, and use with mobile technologies. All that said, what are some approaches we can take to overcome this wide range of obstacles pertaining to these technologies and decentralized trials?
First, I think it is, and Flo mentioned this earlier, training, right? And I think a lot of times when I'm working with clients, they tend to short cycle training or remove it from a budget, just because, again, it's a line item that sometimes they don't see the value of. So we need to do a better job as an industry understanding what is training and the onboarding process, because all of this tech can actually add burden to a patient. And it is cultural. It has socioeconomic factors. It has a lot of different areas as we go global throughout the world of different regions, different countries. There's still changing regulations. There are still changing dynamics of what is appropriate, and even indications that Flo was talking about before, what's appropriate based on your indication of what the protocol's endpoint is. We forget that sometimes that cultural variations do occur. So I think that's the planning that I mentioned before, is what are you really trying to do as you start rolling out the study? What may work well in the US or North America may fall flat in certain parts of Europe or even in APAC. So again, just take a look at it more holistically. There is no silver bullet, and you may have to make some slight tweaks or changes to it. Again, make sure your protocol is sound and the endpoint and the accuracy of the data is, but just think, really hard about what you're trying to do at the end of the day.
Yeah, Scott, and I think, if I could just add to that, one of the parts of that question came through, I think I heard was digital maturity between sites. I think as providers in this space, the onus is on us to provide the right data to the right participant at the right time, right? And I think of even things like, typically ECOA, historically was just something that was used by data management, but we've seen a trend change where the data collected directly from the patient from their diaries is made available to the investigator or the site staff at the time of the visit. So as you think about these hybrid DCT studies, we're providing more and better data to the site. That leads to the second part of what we were talking about today, is how do you automate that collection of that data and provide that insights out of the data to our site. So provide the right data to the right person at the right time, automate to provide better insights is somehow I see it. But certainly Flo and Mariah, feel free to add to that.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add is around the regulations, right? I mean, we can't change the regulations. They are what they are, and we have to follow them. I think we need to be flexible. So, for our sponsors, it's important to recognize that it's not the platform provider or your contract research organization that's dictating whether or not you can use e-consent in some countries or not. It's really about the regulations, and it's also about really understanding those regulations, because somebody may have said, no, you can't do that, but they didn't actually read the regs or the guidance, and that guidance may say you can't in this specific situation, and you're not in that situation. So it goes back a little bit to what I mentioned earlier about really understanding what those requirements are, and being able to then translate that. It makes things much more complex on the front end, but the better you do with that planning, like Scott said, on the front end, the better you are serving all of the stakeholders.
Great. And I'll just give 1 second before we close up, because I see we are getting ready to approach our hour. I didn't know if there were any other final thoughts based on the responses that anyone wanted to chip in. If not, I guess we're going to get ready to wrap up today's discussion. But Mariah, Flo, David, Scott, thank you so much for your time today. What a great opportunity to talk about this topic. I know we're all on different time zones right now, so I appreciate you being available. I'd also like to thank our audience, also international, who took some time out of their day to watch this webcast. And to participate into the Q&A. Some really great questions. Again, I see that we have some other questions that we did not get to today, but our panel will review and respond offline. Most importantly, of course, I'd like to thank Oracle Life Sciences for making today's educational webcast possible. As we wrap up and conclude today, I'd like to ask everyone in the audience if they'd kindly participate in a brief survey. The survey is going to appear on your screen just after the presentation concludes in another moment. You'll also receive an email alerting you when this webcast is available for replay, and we invite you to forward that announcement to any colleagues who may find today's discussion insightful and who may have missed today's live event. So all that said, thank you again to everyone for their time and participation, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.